Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter and co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
This show's brought to you by the Open to Hope Foundation and the Compassionate Friends. Heidi, we have a very compelling topic today. We're going to be talking about military-related suicide, and there's been a lot of talk about that recently, hasn't there?
Yeah, because there's a lot of military suicide right now.
Right.
A lot more than people know, I think.
And a lot of concern about support for the military. And today we're going to have Janet Burroway. She's a New York Times best-selling author, and she has written this wonderful book, Losing Tim, which is a memoir about the death of her oldest son, Tim. And Tim was a U.S. soldier and contractor who served in Iraq and died by suicide in 2004. And by the way, I want to say this book is a wonderful read, and if you've had a suicide in your life or just want a read about a very compelling story, this is a great book to get, Losing Tim. And then we're going to have on our show Brian Kinsella, and we're happy to say, Heidi, that there is some support for military and suicide, and Brian is kind of at the forefront. He's the CEO of having this happen, and his organization is Stop Soldier Suicide, and we'll be talking to him about groups that he is setting up for people in the military.
And I just want to say that I like the fact that he was motivated to do this because he was having personal experiences with people that were dying by suicide or attempting suicide, and he was so concerned that he wanted to do something about it.
Absolutely. Well, let's start out with Janet. Janet,
Hi,
welcome
Janet.
to our show.
My pleasure. Very
It's
nice.
wonderful
to be here.
having you on the show today. It's not wonderful for the reason we're having you on, because I know you've done many shows, because I know you've been up for wonderful things like the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award, and you have a best-selling book in writing. But this must have been a really compelling, maybe difficult book to write.
You know, a number of people have said to me, it must have been a difficult book to write. It was not.
Wow.
It was a difficult experience to live through,
Yeah.
but the writing was obsessive, was compulsive. For a couple of years, I was just writing every day in a journal, writing. It's what I do. You know,
And was it healing at all, just to get it out on paper and get your story out, or no?
I can't actually answer that question. It obviously was necessary for me to do it, so it was healing in the sense that I couldn't not. I'd have died if I hadn't.
Wow.
But the book, once I realized that what I was doing was writing a book, because at first I didn't know that. I was just obsessively writing, first of all, about what I was feeling every day. And then I realized that what I was putting in my journal didn't quite catch the pattern of my days, which was not just grief. It was grief memory. And I realized that I needed to capture Tim's life and try to hold a little bit of Tim on the earth by writing about those memories. And after a couple of years, my husband said to me, "This is what you do. If you were a cabinet maker, you'd make a cabinet." You know? And I realized that I might be able to form it into a book that would be helpful to people who are going through the same kind of thing.
And talk about this. He had an interesting trajectory, a little different, about his experience and what happened.
Well, Tim was one of those little boys who never got over his first love of all the toys of war. You know, he just passionate about his tanks and his little soldiers, and he would paint his little soldiers with a one hairbrush. Through his teens, he acquired this obsession with the idea of warrior spirit, which was inextricable from his patriotism, which was extreme. He once came home at 3 a.m. crying because he couldn't go to fight in the Falklands for England.
Wow.
You know, and for me, left liberal mom, you know, I had no idea where this came from. But it was also clear to me this is who he was, and I was not going to change him by yelling at him. You know,
So fast forward a little bit. He did ROTC in college, and then he went on to become a ranger, right?
Yes,
he joined the service.
He joined the service. He was 4 years in the Army. Then he was 8 years in the reserve. And while he was in the reserve, he volunteered for everything in sight. And he went to Bosnia-Herzegovina and Congo and Angola, and his last job was in Namibia. And in Namibia, he was running out of the embassy in the capital of this southern African country that not very many people know very much about in America. He was out of the embassy. He was directing the efforts of a demining project that the United States had given to Namibia as a humanitarian gesture. And at the end of his year there, the Army privatized that job. And we had no idea that that was a tiny little piece of a vast
So he was
policy
no
change.
longer in the service then?
He then ended his time in the service and kept the same job, but as a contractor.
Okay.
And one of the things I think that is important to me is to acknowledge that we in America have taken very different attitudes toward our brave young men and women in the services and the contractors. But the contractor employees are mostly vets. So they're the same people in many, many instances. And certainly my son, who volunteered to go to Iraq, did so with the same enthusiastic, patriotic, warrior spirit belief that we had to be in Iraq and that we would find the WMDs and that the Army was doing a brilliant job and that he wanted to be part of it. You know, no different in essence than the feeling he had had about.
So he became a
Yes.
contractor, and then he became basically disillusioned
Yes.
and ended up shooting himself, right?
Yes, yes. He went back after 7 months in Iraq to his family, and it's only afterward that you put together the clues and can begin to understand what was going on with him. But we, having put together a number of clues, we know that he was bitterly disillusioned. Well, my husband and I had seen that before with the Army and with the behavior of especially Paul Bremer, who ran the coalition and had de-Baathized Iraq, and especially his company, which he thought was careless of the lives of its men and greedy and many of the things that we think about contractors.
You know, it's interesting because I think that there is a camaraderie around the military that he was missing that kind of camaraderie when he took his life. Now, his wife thought that he had post-traumatic stress syndrome, and I know you thought that, you know, I mean,
I do think he did.
But one of the things I thought was interesting in reading the book was that it was hard to document it because these guys buck it up. They don't talk about it. They don't document it. They don't say that what they saw.
The idea
And so
came up
it's very
between
hard.
his widow and her therapist. Had never come up during his life. They had not considered that possibility. And ultimately, I have to say, I don't think it matters whether you put that label on it or not. He was deeply suffering from a lot of things that military men suffer when they leave
Right,
the
exactly.
military.
Yeah, and our next guest is going to be talking, Brian Kinsella, who started an organization, Stop Soldier Suicide. We're going to talk to him
Thank
about
goodness.
some of those issues and how he has seen it as a military person and come in and try to do that. One of the things that, before we go to the roll-in from the Stop Soldier Suicide, I just want you to mention one thing which I found fairly shocking, is that you went to a group to get support.
I went to a website after Tim's death to join a military a support group for parents of military suicides, and they didn't want me because he was not in the Army anymore. He was a contractor.
Wow, that's horrible.
Yeah.
That is shocking, actually.
Yeah,
I
it
was
is.
shocked.
Yeah.
Well, let's see the roll-in, and then let's have a discussion with Brian Kinsella about Stop Soldier Suicide.
That's found is to lost, feathers to the frost. I pray your saints and statues can forgive you for it all. broken as the bread. Like all humankind, you cannot blame the victim for the gallows in her mind. The gallows in her mind. We all do. We die to please our sentimental queens.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for being on the show today.
Hi, Brian.
Thank you so much for having me, and it was excellent to hear your story about Tim. I look forward to reading the book.
Thank you.
Well, Brian, tell us what made you decide to start this organization.
Absolutely. So I served on active duty for 5 years from 2005 to 2010. Spent a lot of the time commanding soldiers, leading soldiers in various roles in different capacities. But in my very first duty assignment, when I was 22 years old, I was assigned as a platoon leader in Germany. And within the first few months of my time leading this unit, with a mission to prepare to go to war, a young woman in my unit, 18 years old, from Puerto Rico, she slit her wrist in an attempt to take her own life.
Wow.
Now, the attempt was unsuccessful. Today, she's actually a transition veteran, a college graduate, and a proud mother. And she got through that darkest hour and found the will to live. And that was my first experience with military suicide. As I progressed through my career, I saw it in various other capacities and manifestations. Spent 15 months in Baghdad during the surge, and while commanding a unit of about 50 soldiers there, started to see how individuals were struggling with things, and they were all different. There are different catalysts, different underlying reasons why men and women in that unit and other units were struggling. Didn't see any suicides directly, but as a leader, use different tools to get people help. In my very last duty assignment, I was a general's aide and got to see the weekly roll-ups of attempted suicides and DWIs and various different things that soldiers were struggling with, and I was shocked at the numbers.
Yes.
And right before we actually went and deployed to Haiti as part of the earthquake response team, one of the brightest soldiers in the unit took his life. Now, we went and we did the Haiti mission and we came back, but for me, I knew that I had to get some people together, get an organization that filled this critical gap to connect soldiers, veterans, military family members to help. And so founded that in 2010.
I love that you're doing this, and one of the things that I was really surprised in the rolling that we just saw was that the rate of suicide is 50% higher. Was that what I read, among military than it is among civilians?
Yes, no, that's the veteran rate. So it's
Okay.
estimated that veterans, 18 to 22 veterans, are taking their own lives each day.
Wow.
Now, those are extrapolated figures based on veteran death recording statistics, but not every state accurately records veteran deaths. So we really actually don't know, and it's something that the VA is working hard on to try to understand. But yes,
And
as
those
of right
veteran
now,
deaths are not just Iraq and Afghanistan, but also some still from Vietnam.
right? So about 69% of veteran suicides are men over the age of 50. So one of the reasons why we have this organization in place is we're not just trying to solve, for the active duty soldiers and the soldiers that are just coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. It's really building, this infrastructure to support and sustain a problem, that we think there's a tidal wave coming 20, 30 years from now.
Okay, wow.
Because
So people like Tim is what you're talking about.
Absolutely. Well, Tim was 40.
Yeah,
he had just
that's what
passed his 40th birthday.
People who are not necessarily active in the service at that time. or people that are. Well, what about your organization? How many chapters do you, how does it do? What does it do? Is it chapters? And your headquarters is in Ohio, isn't it?
So it's in North Carolina. We do have a chapter in Ohio.
Okay.
So what we've done is we've come up with both a national organization with the mission to stop soldier suicide, but really we're a purple organization: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, veterans, and military family members. Because it's not just that man or woman who goes and fights, or deploys. It's their spouse sometimes that's dealing with things back home. It could be their kids that are coping. And so we opened it up to everyone. And so we also have chapters that we are trying to set up communities that can penetrate both on the military base and into areas where there are large veteran populations. So we're headquartered out of Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. We've got a great relationship there at the state level, as well as with some of the local communities in Raleigh-Durham. And we're really trying to prove out this concept to extend the chapter model. One of the things, though, that we're finding is that the demand for our services is so great, and we can't scale the organization fast enough. And unlike many other organizations that maybe want this to see this demand, right, because it can fuel growth, we can't afford to fail the men and women who are reaching out to us.
Right.
And so we've purposely tried to put the brakes on this thing to say, well, wait a second. Let's try to understand just how much demand there is, forecast it, and then go to the VA and other organizations and say, here's what we think we need funding for. Because one of the things we don't want to do is become an organization that's bloated, that has high overhead or operating costs. We want to keep the organization as lean as possible to be able to to sustain operation for multiple decades.
So are the people that are coming to you, the people that are in the military that are suffering from whatever it might be, post-traumatic stress or depression, or is it families that have had a suicide death, or is it both?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It is both.
Okay.
Right now, about 70% or more are coming to us through social media, and that's where we're finding our ability to really penetrate the most many communities. And again, I think that's partially because we've really tried to scale back the advertising of the services, because we just don't want to see that tidal wave until we can truly handle it. But yeah, mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, and actual people who are struggling reach out.
Okay.
And so when they reach out to us, we assign a case officer and treat them as a client. Everything is confidential. We don't share anybody's information unless we need to facilitate. And then we don't just say, hey, well, you're thinking about taking your own life, because not everyone is. Right? People are struggling with various different things. So we try to understand the second derivative, right? What is the underlying cause? What's the trigger? What's the catalyst that's setting somebody down this path? And then we try to basically take our partnerships that we have and team that person, that client, up with one of our partner organizations. So it's a hub and spoke method.
Yeah.
And so for each person, we break it down into verticals. Some people, it might be post-traumatic stress. Another person might be paralysis, loss of limb. Another person might be substance abuse. And then we go out to our partners, and if we don't have a partnership, we'll actually take that case officer, and he or she will go out and proactively try to find a partnership, and then we make the connection, and then we follow up.
Now, when you're talking about partnership, would that be like with TAPS, Bonnie Carroll's organization, or the Compassionate Friends, organizations that already exist in the community? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
And the VA?
So I'll get to the VA in a second. But yes, so TAPS, great organization. We know them well, and we actually refer people back and forth to TAPS. We always encourage organizations to reach out to us that want to partner with us, where we can put them on our list, to be able to go to our database and say, all right, now we have this person in this part of the country or part of the world. They need help for X, Y, or Z. Let's go to our database and try to figure that out.
Yeah. And I just want to say something about TAPS, because I'm on their advisory board. For those of you that don't know what TAPS is, it's the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors of Military Loss. And like you said, they're a great support group if you've had a military loss.
But I think your difference is you're specializing in suicide, right?
Yeah, so I think the most important takeaway about what our organization is not just that we're focusing on military and veteran suicide, but we're trying to change the way people think about suicide, the stigma of receiving treatment,
Yes.
and about mental health care. And oh, by the way, because we are founded and run by people who have worn the uniform,
Right.
there's that sense of camaraderie
Yeah.
and
Uh-huh.
mutual understanding,
Yeah.
and we
Crucial.
fill a crucial gap
Yeah.
that the VA can't fill, the
Yeah.
Department of Defense can't fill, and that the various underlying service organizations can't fill. And
So it's peer-to-peer support.
right, and then we have a hub and spoke network to basically connect people,
Right.
to keep that organizational structure as lean as
But
possible.
the person who refers you out will be somebody who's worn the uniform. I think that's they can send you out to other organizations, but that first contact
Yeah.
will be with somebody who can really.
It
get
is.
it. So
We're
they
so
get it.
excited. Our triage director is
think that's
awesome.
awesome. I think that's great.
He's a former non-commissioned officer from the Army who transitioned out of the military after serving for 20 years. And he's now got his Master's of Social Work,
I
and
love
he's
it.
spearheading this
He
entire.
can talk the talk and he can walk the walk.
Exactly.
That's important.
And again, the whole point of this, this exercise is not only to save lives, but it's really, as we wind down now this war in Afghanistan, and take this population of veterans who have served in all of these conflicts, whether it was war, or somebody who went and did the Haiti operation, or somebody who never even deployed, but is struggling with these with various things. It's about taking them back into society and helping them become productive members of our society.
And helping them transition back in, because it can be really hard.
Really hard.
Absolutely.
Well, Janet, I wondered when you're listening to him talk about it, what's your thought?
One of the things that I think is when he's talking about the statistics of the daily suicides, whenever I hear that number, I think 22 deaths, that's 22 mothers, 22 fathers, how many siblings, how many best friends. It's my book begins shockingly to some people by saying every suicide is a suicide bomber. And I mean that there are so many people who have the shrapnel of that death when it happens.
Because it goes out.
It goes
And
out
impacts so many people.
in every direction.
Yeah.
So, and I'm so glad that someone is doing your work. Thank you.
And to get back to your question, thank you. To get back to your question about the VA, because it is an important one.
There's now a new secretary of the VA, and
Right.
we as an organization are really excited for him to come in and make the changes that that we believe need to be made for the VA. And the VA is, I think, vilified by many, but actually,
Overwhelmed.
yeah, it's really overwhelmed. And this is exactly why organizations that exist, that are doing the right things, that have the right organizational structures, can work side by side with the VA to fill these gaps. And we have great relationships with the VA
Good.
and with their heads of suicide prevention. And we actually modeled some of our own treatment and triage mechanisms around some of their best practices. And we have a direct referral line into the VA crisis line. We advertise that on our website, on our social media, and they're really excited for us to grow our mission and to continue working with them as a partner. The trick for us, though, is to build our infrastructure to be able to support it. And this is why I'm out, pounding the table, letting people know that, hey, look, there are over 40,000 veteran nonprofit organizations in this country. We need to consolidate. We need to pick, the best horses, and we need to put money and funding behind those organizations. And we believe strongly that our proven method, we've helped over 500 people in the last 5 years. We've
The
got a
method
proven method.
must involve that camaraderie from the band of brothers.
It's absolutely that's that mutual understanding.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
talking with people who have been there
and who are structuring an organization around it, but also having the mindset of, we can't bring it all in-house, right? We can't be everything to everybody. We've got to just understand why someone is going down that path to wanting to take their own life, and then using our network and using other great organizations like TAPS to actually,
Compassionate Friends, which is
Compassionate
an
Friends.
organization for people who lost children, grandchildren, and siblings, and plenty of the military are talking about siblings that they've lost, children, parents. So, but I like this idea of the military, the ones that refer it, because in your local community, there's probably a grief organization that's great, and if you've got a military person telling you to go to that organization and
carries a lot more weight,
use them, I think it's an excellent idea. It's all about community now. With the internet and everything, and thank you so much for what you're doing in community. And Janet, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about your son
Thank you
Tim.
for
also,
having me.
Yes, thank you so much for everything you're doing with the military and with our veterans to build awareness and to create change.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for watching our show tonight. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with Dr. Heidi Horsley. And Heidi, and I want to say to you, if you've lost hope, please lean on ours till you find your own, and God bless.